I never thought I'd be the one to have the police called on me, just for casting a fishing rod into a lake I own. That morning, the sky was clear and the breeze gentle. I brought out a folding chair, a can of soda, and my old fishing rod to the edge of the lake. I had just left the city, moving into a small cabin by the lake to enjoy some peace after nearly 30 years working in construction. This land was my inheritance from my father, passed down since my grandfather's time. I hadn't even cast my bait yet when a middle-aged blonde woman suddenly stormed out from somewhere. Her eyes narrowed, one hand clutching a phone, the other holding a clipboard stuffed with papers. "What are you doing here?" she shouted. "This is an HOA private lake. You're trespassing on community property. I'm calling the police right now." Before I could even react, I heard her screaming into her phone. "There's a strange man trespassing by the lake. I suspect he's homeless." I was stunned. I was sitting on my own land, land that bears my name, with a deed issued back in 1968. That woman had no idea. She had just started a legal battle she couldn't win. Her name is Karen, and this is the story of how I taught her and the entire HOA a lesson they'd never forget. My name is Mark Whitman. I'm 57 years old. I used to be a construction director for a major building firm in Dallas. For 3 decades, I lived in the midst of honking cars, deadlines, concrete dust, and pressure, until my heart finally spoke up. After a severe chest pain last spring, the doctor didn't mince words. "You should retire early if you still want to be around to meet your grandchild." So I retired. I packed everything up and returned to the paradise of my childhood, a rustic wooden cabin by Redwood Lake. This land was left to me by my father, about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town. Quiet, fresh, and most importantly, undisturbed. Or so I thought. Across the lake, just in the last few years, a neighborhood called Sunrise Pines had sprung up. Identical houses, white fences, and a rule book thick as a dictionary. And leading that community was a woman named Karen Stokes. Karen appointed herself president of the HOA. No one voted for her, but everyone feared her. She was notorious for her clipboard, always ready to jot down anyone who parked incorrectly, mowed the lawn too late, or flew the wrong flag on the wrong holiday. Rumor has it she once reported an 8-year-old for drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. From the first time I laid eyes on her, I knew she was the kind of person who could never admit she was wrong. And in her eyes, I, a man fishing in front of a weathered wooden cabin, was a threat to the order of the community. Karen never asked my name. She didn't care who I was. All she saw was that I wasn't wearing an HOA resident badge, so by default, I was a trespasser. The irony is, the lake she was trying so hard to protect isn't even on the HOA map. In fact, the entire stretch of land by the lake, from the water's edge to the small walking trail, belongs to my family. And it has since before Karen was even born. But Karen didn't care about facts. To her, rules were the law. And if no one stood up to her, she would continue to reign like a queen. Unfortunately for her, this time, she picked the wrong guy to mess with. After that first time Karen called the police to arrest me for the crime of fishing on my own land, I thought it was over. The officers came, looked over my documents, then politely apologized and left. I assumed Karen would come to her senses. But no, for people like her, logic was never part of the equation. 3 days later, I found a flyer stuffed under my cabin door. The headline in bold red capital letters screamed, "Warning, dangerous stranger near lake area, Sunrise Pines HOA management." Below it was a crude sketch of a man, wearing a plaid shirt, a hat, and fishing. Who else could it be? Karen had launched a smear campaign against me like I was some wanted fugitive. The next day, I walked out to the lake and saw a newly posted sign. HOA private area, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. The problem? That sign was planted deep inside my property. I took it down and leaned it neatly against the porch. An hour later, Karen stormed up, her face as red as a tomato, her finger trembling as she pointed at me. "You just broke the law. You have no right to remove HOA signage." I replied, "That sign was on my land, and I don't recall renting it out to you." Karen fumed like a boiling kettle. She stormed off, and of course, called the police again. Things escalated quickly. A week later, Karen organized an HOA meeting and sent out invites to all members concerned about lake security. I wasn't invited, even though I own the entire lake. That evening, a kind neighbor named Bill, a retired electrician, knocked on my door. "Mark," he said, "just thought you should know. At the meeting, Karen claimed you were squatting on HOA land and trying to build an illegal shack." I nearly dropped my soda can. "She even proposed installing cameras around the lake to monitor the intruder," Bill added, barely suppressing laughter. 2 days later, I received an official letter titled HOA Violation Notice. Signed, Karen Stokes, HOA President. The contents demanded that I cease all unauthorized construction, parking, and gathering around the lake area, remove all non-compliant property, aka my folding chair, attend an HOA hearing to explain my actions. I laughed out loud. Clearly, Karen hadn't checked the land ownership records. She just believed that if she shouted louder, wrote more notices, and posted more signs, the truth would simply disappear. But she was wrong. I started collecting original paperwork, the land deed from my grandfather, a 1964 county survey map, property tax records in my name, clearly and legally. This battle had officially begun, and I had no intention of losing. I worked in construction for nearly 30 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: paperwork doesn't lie. People, on the other hand, often do. Right after receiving Karen's HOA violation notice, I didn't react immediately. Instead, I brewed a cup of coffee, sat at the wooden desk in my cabin, and pulled out my family's old file box. Inside was a treasure trove Karen had no idea existed. I found the land deed transferring ownership from my grandfather to my father, clearly outlining the size and boundaries of the property. A certified county plat map showing every detail: the lake, the walking trail, even the edge of the forest, all within my family's property lines. This year's updated property tax records listing the legal owner, Mark Whitman. That's me. Those documents alone were enough to dismantle every ridiculous HOA regulation Karen tried to weaponize. I made copies and sent them to a local real estate attorney, Greg, an old college friend of mine. 3 days later, Greg called me back. His voice carried a note of excitement. "Mark," he said, "she picked the wrong guy to mess with. That HOA has zero jurisdiction over your land. That lake is completely private property. And get this, the walking trail their residents use, it's on your land too." I asked, "So can I stop them from using it?" Greg laughed. "You can build a fence, post signs, heck, charge them per footstep if you want." The next morning, I mailed an official response to the HOA, including copies of the ownership documents and a polite reminder. I respectfully request that the HOA cease all harassment, remove unauthorized signage, and stop distributing false information about me. If not, I will pursue appropriate legal action. Karen received the letter, and just as I expected, she refused to accept the truth. That afternoon, while I was mowing the lawn, I noticed Karen and two men, presumably other HOA members, standing about 20 meters from my cabin. She was waving a folder, pointing angrily toward the lake, speaking loudly. I walked over, gave a friendly wave. "Afternoon, folks. Need me to make you extra copies of the paperwork?" Karen stared at me, then sneered, "You think your paperwork can stand against community law? Here, HOA is the law." I smiled and calmly replied, "No, Karen, the law is the law. The HOA is just a group of people who didn't read the fine print." The next day, a letter from Greg's law office arrived at the HOA's doorstep. It formally demanded that they remove all unauthorized signage within 72 hours, cease the spread of false information, refrain from approaching, threatening, or harassing me in any form. At that point, Karen began to feel the pressure, and the residents of Sunrise Pines started getting curious. A few of them, people who once believed her, quietly stopped by my cabin, offered apologies for the misunderstanding, and even began questioning the HOA's grip. This was just the beginning, but for the first time, the balance of power was shifting in my favor. And Karen, the one who used to shout the loudest, was starting to lose control. After receiving the warning letter from my lawyer, Karen disappeared for a few days. I thought she had finally backed off. But no. Karen doesn't know how to quit. She was just preparing for a public performance. One Saturday afternoon, I found a notice taped to my cabin gate. Emergency HOA meeting. Sunrise Pines residents topic: lake area security and public land usage rights. Time Sunday, 6 p.m. Location: HOA Community Clubhouse. Lemonade and cookies will be served. I chuckled. They didn't mention my name, but clearly, I was the main event. I called Greg, my lawyer, and asked, "What do you think if I showed up unannounced?" Greg replied, "Bring the map, Bring the tax bill and bring your winning smile. 6 p.m. Sunday. I wore a deep blue shirt, a fabric cap, and walked into that meeting room like a total stranger. The room was packed. Around 30 residents sat in folding chairs. At the front, a long table where Karen stood, confidently, backed by a projection of the neighborhood map. Karen opened her presentation with a full-on attack. We are facing a security threat. An unidentified individual, not part of our HOA, has occupied the lake area, posted unauthorized signage, and intimidated residents. As HOA chair, I propose installing surveillance cameras and building a security fence around the lake. Some nodded, others exchanged puzzled looks. I raised my hand. Excuse me, may I say a few words? The entire room turned to look. Karen flinched slightly, but kept her composure. You're not a member of this HOA. This is a private meeting. I stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the table. My name is Mark Whitman. I own the entire property surrounding the lake, including the walking path you all use every morning. The room went dead silent. I continued, calmly and clearly. This is the land deed from 1964. This is the county-stamped plat map. This is the property tax bill with my name. This is a letter from my attorney stating the HOA has no jurisdiction over this land. I looked up. I am not trespassing on public land. I'm sitting on my own property. And I've never stopped anyone from walking or fishing until I was threatened and defamed by the very person hosting this meeting. A man in the front row, maybe in his 60s, spoke up. Wait a minute. So the lake doesn't belong to the HOA? I nodded. A woman in the back murmured, I remember Karen saying last year the lake was community-owned. We even paid maintenance fees for it. Karen's voice rose in protest. I've only ever done what's best for this community. This man set up chairs, disrupted landscaping. No one even knows who he is. Greg stepped out from the back, speaking calmly. I'm Mr. Whitman's legal representative. Any unauthorized signage, false statements, and harassment of a landowner may lead to litigation. The atmosphere shifted, from frustration to confusion to silence, and finally, realization. A young man whispered to the person next to him, We've been trusting the wrong person all this time. Karen stood frozen. Her fingers clenched her clipboard so tightly turned white. No applause. No support. An older neighbor, Bill, turned to me with a grin. Mark, if you're hosting a barbecue by the lake next week, I'll bring the beer. Karen had nothing left to say. The meeting ended with no votes, and the trust in both the HOA and Karen officially crumbled. The morning after the meeting, Karen no longer walked around the lake like she used to. No clipboard, no signs, no watchful glares from across the shoreline. A week passed. Then 2. Karen had completely vanished from the lake, the very place she once believed she ruled. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note tucked into the wooden mailbox in front of my cabin. No name on the envelope, but the handwriting was neat and familiar. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused. I just wanted things to be neat and orderly, but perhaps I went too far. I won't interfere with the lake area anymore. The signature at the bottom, tiny and discreet, read simply, KS. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because in truth, the greatest apology was the silence that followed for the rest of the month. Karen officially resigned from the HOA board a few weeks later. The community elected someone new, kind, calm, and clipboard-free. The warning signs were all taken down. No more threat letters. No more emergency meetings. Only the sound of birds, a still lake, and my familiar folding chair. Every morning, I brew my coffee, sit beneath the old elm tree, and cast my fishing line into the crystal-clear water. The ducks paddle past as if nothing had ever happened. Occasionally, HOA residents stop by, with muffins, friendly hellos, and sometimes a little sheepishness. Mark, we owe you an apology. We should have asked you earlier, instead of believing someone just because she shouted the loudest. I just smile. No hard feelings. People were only doing what they thought was right. This story taught me something. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the one that's right. And sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a raised voice. It's a property map. I'm not someone who looks for fights. I just want to live peacefully beside my lake. But if someone forces me to choose between silence and justice, then I'll choose paperwork, the law, and a cold cup of coffee. If you've ever met a Karen in your life, someone who thinks they are the law, someone who yells instead of listens, someone who holds a clipboard more than a cup of coffee. Then drop a comment below. Have you ever had someone try to control something you had every right to? How did you handle it? Did you stay quiet or clap back with the law? I'd love to hear your story. And if you think the Karen in this story deserved that wake-up call, go ahead and hit the like button to give her a tiny little strike on her clipboard. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next legal justice served story. Because trust me, this world has plenty more Karens out there. As for me, tomorrow morning I'll still be brewing coffee, casting my line, and enjoying the peace on land that bears my name. The only difference is, this time, no one's bold enough to put up a no trespassing sign anymore.